Hello, today we're going to talk about marking the evaluate the usefulness questions. What we're going to do is go over the various marks that are available, and we're going to look at an answer that I have written so that we can see how it is marked and where it loses marks and why it loses marks, and that will give you an understanding of what you're going to do when you go off and practice marking these questions yourself. Now, by marking them yourself, it's really going to give you a very good idea of the structure required in answering them and some common mistakes and how to avoid them. So by marking things yourself, you get an idea of what is required and what to do and what not to do. So the questions that I've given you to mark are answers to questions from the past papers, and this is also a past paper question. It's a question from the 2019 paper, I think, and it is from section 3, Free at Last, and it says as follows. Source A is a speech by an Alabama senator in 1921. Source A. As soon as the immigrants step off the decks of their ships, our problem has begun, the spread of communism and anarchy. These ships are filled with crooks who are a menace and a danger to us every day. Thousands come here who never take the oath to support our Constitution and become citizens of the United States. They pay allegiance to some other country and flag, while they live upon the benefits of our own. Something must be done to stem the tide of immigration. And the question asks us, evaluate the usefulness of source A as evidence of the reasons why many Americans were against immigration in the 1920s. And underneath it tells us a little bit, or gives us a little bit of guidance on how to answer this question. And it says you may want to comment on what type of source it is, who wrote it, when they wrote it, why they wrote it, what they say, and what has been missed out. So the answer I have written is as follows. Source A is a primary source written in 1921. This is useful. It was written at the time of immigration in the 1920s. Source A was written by an Alabama senator. It was written by an eyewitness to the anti-immigration feelings in the 1920s. Source A states, these ships are filled with crooks who are a menace and a danger to us every day. This is accurate as it matches my own knowledge. Source A states, as soon as the immigrants step off the decks of their ships, our problem has begun, the spread of communism and anarchy. This is useful as it matches my own knowledge. The source is less useful as it fails to mention that many Americans blamed immigrants for increasing competition for housing in many cities. And then underneath you can see that there's the kind of marking structure that I'm going to get you to use when you actually have a go at doing these ones for yourself. So first of all, look at the time point. Source A is a primary source written in 1921. This is useful as written at the time of immigration in the 1920s. So that is a mark. And the reason that it is a mark is because it includes the date and the fact that it's a primary source, and it includes the words useful and explains why it's useful. So it was useful was written at the time of immigration in the 1920s, which is what the question is asking us about. Then we move on to author. Source A was written by an Alabama senator. It was written by an eyewitness to the anti-immigration feelings in the 1920s. Now, this is quite a good point in many ways. However, it is not a mark because it does not include the word useful. So you're not evaluating the usefulness if you don't include the word useful. So you don't get a mark for that. You don't explain why it being written by an eyewitness is useful or not. You just say that it is, or I've just said that it was written by an eyewitness. So no mark there. Then our first content point. These ships are filled with crooks who are a menace and a danger to us every day. This is accurate as it matches my own knowledge. Now, when answering the evaluate the usefulness question, you've got to pick out source points that actually directly answer the question. And the question is about the anti-immigration feeling that grew up in the 1920s. And so ships being filled with crooks who are a menace and a danger to us every day is a reason why people began to turn against immigrants. They felt that they were criminals coming over from abroad and going to spread crime in America. However, this is not a mark, and it's not a mark for the same reason as the author wasn't a mark, because it does not include the word useful. You have to say this is useful because it's accurate as it matches my own knowledge, and it's not said that it's useful. So no mark there. Then move on to the second content point. As soon as the immigrants step off the decks of their ships, our problem has begun, the spread of communism and anarchy. This is useful as it matches my own knowledge. Now, it's talking about the spread of communism and anarchy. This is a fear that a lot of Americans had, or certainly some Americans had in the 1920s, and so that was a reason why anti-immigration feeling grew in that period. So that is a correct source point, and it gets the mark because it includes the word useful and explains why it's useful. It says useful because it matches its own knowledge, so that is a mark. Then finally, we are on to the omission point. The source is less useful as it fails to mention that many Americans blamed immigrants for increasing competition for housing in many cities. Now that is correct. Many Americans, some Americans certainly, began to feel anger at immigrants coming over and causing problems in terms of housing. So it's very familiar, obviously, and so that's a correct point, and it gets the mark because it explains that it's less useful. So it blends those two things together. It's explaining the lack of usefulness and giving a correct point of knowledge in relation to the question. So overall, that gets 3 out of 5. Now there are 3 questions for you to do yourself. You're just going to go through them line by line, try and work out whether it gets the mark or not. Try and be very careful, read it carefully. Make sure you're making sure it includes the word useful, it does all the things that's required, it has source points that are relevant to the question, it has omission points that are relevant to the question, and overall it does what the question is asking us. If you do that, you should be able to understand the mark that's given for all 3 questions. If there are any questions, just let us know.